All right, levels of behavior. Wonderful. Okay. The third most important part to visually analyzing a graph is trend. Trend comes from analyzing a behavior across time and seeing to what degree the ratio of the x over y, or the trend or increase or decrease in our behavior is going. Okay? The higher a slope when we look at our trend, we can say the faster a behavior is changing, which kind of also plays into our level of behavior, right? So the higher our trend, most likely the higher level or change in behavior has occurred. All right, so let me give you some examples. This is what we would call a stable trend. Okay, it's not increasing, it's not decreasing. If you were to draw a line about through the middle of the points, it's staying the same, it's staying level. This is what we call an increasing or ascending trend. Our data points are going up. It's a positive slope. Okay? Now, we also have a decreasing trend. Our slope is going down. Then last but not least, this one that you just saw is variable or no trend. That's when data points are kind of everywhere. Okay? So when you're looking at trend, it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing that the trend is increasing or decreasing. It's totally dependent on the behavior for measure, right? Because sometimes we want to measure a behavior that we want to decrease, such as instances of aggression to people. So if that were your behavior of concern and you were visually analyzing the graph, you would hope that the level of behavior is decreasing over time and our trend is negative. But if it was a positive skill or behavior that we wanted to increase, such as sight word acquisition, then we would hope our trend would be the opposite, right? It would be an increasing trend or a positive trend. All right, good. So let's make a SAF meds card. Trend. Our definition: visually analyzing a graph to attain if the behavior is increasing, decreasing, or stable, and at what rate. And rate is also a key part of that, because remember, if we talked about this, if you started off with your SAFMEDS graph by only knowing maybe 4 terms correct on your first trial, the first time you tested yourself, and then after studying, you all of a sudden shot up to 8 and then 16, wow. That would be a pretty big incline, okay? And we would say our rate of change is really high. But if you started off with 4 and then the next time you tested yourself, you went to 6, and then the next time you tested yourself, maybe you went to about 5, so you dropped down a little bit, then you came back up to 6, then 8, then 6, then 10, then we would say that your slope and your trend is still an increasing trend, okay? But progress is slow and steady. So maybe you need to study a little bit more. Maybe we need to change that intervention. All right. So those are our 3 important visual analysis tools when it comes to graphing. All right. Before we wrap up our analysis of graphs, I wanted to touch on just 2 other types of graphs that are pretty typical to come across within the behavioral analysis field and setting. I'm sure you've seen these before. I'll show you a nice visual cheat sheet here. It's bright and colorful. So we've been discussing line graphs, okay? Line graphs is really demonstrating how variable our behavior is across time, right? Because we can assess it via trend, via level, and really analyze that variability and change. Other graphs are useful as well, but they might not offer all 3 of those components. So for example, we have bar graphs. Bar graphs are fantastic because we can take different categories or different variables and compare them to one another, okay? But we're not comparing one of those variables and how it changes over time, like our line graph. The same can be said for pie graphs. A pie graph is similar to a bar graph in that you can compare and contrast different variables or categories within a certain set of things and see how much of it takes up. But again, you're not able to analyze any of that information over time. Okay? So that's the big bonus to using a line graph, is that we can use it across the interventions that we implement in our ABA fields. All right. So that about wraps up our graph portion. Now we're going to move on to our SAFMEDS, and then we're going to revisit graphing by plotting our first few tests within our line graph here.